My name's Tim Cockerill, and by day I'm an entomologist, but by night I'm a circus performer. And the only way that I could find to combine these two interests was become interested in the Flea Circus. It's not just a showman's trick, it is actually a genuine exhibition with real live performing fleas. And I found out that it all started 300 or 400 years ago when jewellers were making props, tiny miniature designs and models that were so small that they needed something to show just how small and tiny these things were. So they'd make chains and they'd make model carriages and they'd attach them to live fleas just to show how small the props were. And then in the 1830s, an Italian man called Louis Bertolotto decided that he'd switch the attention from the props onto the fleas themselves, and the Flea Circus was really born then. The early 19th century was the real heyday of the Flea Circus. Any fairground that you went to in the world at that time would have a flea circus. You'd pay your sixpence to the person on the door, you'd go into a tent and you'd see a small table, and there'd be the circus ring in the centre of this table. And then one by one, usually from an old wooden cigar box, the fleas would come. And the fleas were attached to their props already. And things like chariots, like tricycles, would all come out of this box. And then the fleas would pull them along on the Flea Circus ring. When I met the original proprietors of the Flea Circus, one of the guys, who's based in York, had a collection of the original props that were involved in the Flea Circus, and he allowed me to take photos of these, and eventually I built up my own collection. I made the props out of brass, out of parts from watches, and soldered them all together, very intricate work. One of the most interesting things in the Flea Circus, I think, is the duel, where two fleas would fight a battle, and this involves this prop here, where the two fleas would be restrained by the collars around their neck, and they'd be put in this prop facing each other, and then in their legs they'd spin around two tiny miniature swords, and the swords would clash in the middle. One of the acts that was in every single flea circus that you'd see on the fairground was the flea tightrope, and that is exactly as it sounds. You'd have a tiny miniature tightrope like this, and the flea would walk sometimes across the top of the wire, sometimes across the bottom of the wire. Sometimes the flea was carrying an umbrella, which was actually a small piece of coloured paper that was attached to the flea. The most difficult thing about the flea circus nowadays is finding the fleas in the first place. Human fleas are pretty much impossible to get hold of. They're just about extinct in households in the UK at least. And this is one of the reasons really why the flea circus died out, because as hygiene improved in houses throughout the 1930s, 40s and 1950s, well, the human flea pretty much went extinct in houses in the UK. So it wasn't the lack of audiences that caused the decline of the flea circus, it was the lack of performers. So I've had to look for different species of flea that are larger than cat or dog fleas, because cat fleas are just too small and too weak to perform any of the stunts. Then I learned how to put a collar around the flea. And the way that we do this is we have a fine gold wire, and we tie a loop in the wire, and you poke the flea's head through, and then you have to tie the loop tighter and tighter until it's just tight enough to hold on to the flea, but not so tight to restrict it from feeding. Because that's the other difficult thing you have to do, is to feed the fleas. And as the old flea circus professor said, I live off them and they live off me. And the only way to do it is to roll up your sleeve and to have them feed on your arm. Bringing the flea circus back and trying to recreate flea circuses and perform the whole thing again, you realise that it's these shows that go back hundreds of years still captivate audiences today, and I'm fascinated by them. And the idea of any of these shows and the techniques involved in these performances dying out is a horrible idea to me. So what I'm trying to do is I've interviewed all of the old flea circus professors and made this collection and try to realise all of the techniques and how they worked. So by collecting that, I hope to be able to perform a flea circus to the public and to keep this tradition going.